Welcome folks. I want you to imagine a manager. This could be you, this could be the person that manages you. And they drop me an email. I'm coaching that person. Let's call that person Sarah. And they drop me a note asking about the next session that we're working through. And she's motivated to try and improve the way she develops her feedback. She gives feedback to her team members, and she's a bit concerned. She's a bit concerned because she hasn't really done this very well before, but she sees potential in some of her employees. She sees that there's a gap, that she's not giving the guidance and they're not necessarily improving at the rate that she wants to. She's also a little bit concerned because she's previously had a bad experience from receiving feedback from her previous boss. And she's been humiliated, she's been belittled, she's had that experience publicly. So she's got a little bit of reluctance to give feedback because she doesn't want to pass that sort of feeling on. So she wants to do that well. So she drops me an email and it reads like this. I haven't given any real feedback to my team members before because I expect people to take responsibility for their own development. But deep down, I haven't really known how to give feedback, especially since I received some feedback from my boss. So there we go. That's the issue that we've had before. The feedback was probably right that she received from the boss about what I could have done better, but it hurt, it humiliated me, and it actually made me feel less engaged in my work. And in our next session, it would be great to work on how to give feedback to my team in a way that helps them move forward. Okay, so that's the coaching scenario that I'm going to share with you, some of the strategies that I helped Sarah with, particularly around the conditions in which she can make sure that feedback is something that is accepted and is seen as facilitative. And then what I'll do is share with you a couple of tips to sort of almost advanced tips about how you can really polish feedback if you really want to do it well. So the first question I asked Sarah is, have you actually sat down with the people that work for you, the people that report to you, and asked them, what sort of feedback would you like? Would you like feedback at all? And she said no. And so that was probably the best start point, is that actually just having the conversation of sort of what sort of feedback would you like? How would you like that delivered, and when? And so what you're really moving towards there, and what Sarah could start nicely with, is a way of agreeing a method of feedback. Because if you're just sort of giving feedback randomly and perhaps without that person expecting it or really wanting it in a certain way, then that's in itself going to be a bit challenging for the person who's receiving it. So my first tip for Sarah was, look, sit down with your employees and really just talk it through. What sort of level of feedback do we want to engage in? When it's agreed, then it's a sort of, you've got permission to go and explore that and start to give and receive feedback with each other. The next area that I explored with Sarah was this idea of choosing your moments really carefully. And so starting to reflect and review after some relatively big work events. That could be a presentation, that could be a performance in a meeting, it could be a pitch, it could be an important conversation that you've witnessed that person have. And then taking a moment just to say, how do you think that went? And so if you're getting that person, the person that's working for you, if you're getting that person to reflect themselves, then really what you're doing is allowing them to get all the information out. And typically you'll find as a manager that they uncover some of the critical areas that actually you wanted to communicate anyway. And so if somebody says, yeah, I stuttered at that moment, or actually I don't really feel I was assertive enough in that moment, then if you're already thinking that, then you can build upon that and say, yeah, I would tend to agree. I think you're spot on in your reflection, and you're reinforcing already existing thoughts for them. Getting somebody to reflect first actually really offers you an open goal to say, yep, I saw that too, and reinforce something. Or actually say, no, I thought you did better than you actually give yourself credit for there. And so that in itself allows you the opportunity to amplify that feedback they've given themselves, but then also an open goal for you to then say, and I saw this, I thought this potentially could be better, or I thought this potentially was really great. And that kind of leads on to the next area that I talked to Sarah about. And it's perhaps becoming a little bit of a cliched technique, but I think it's really important. And that is the feedback burger or the feedback sandwich. There are other cruder versions of that particular saying. And it goes like a positive and then something a little bit more negative or constructive, and then something positive again. So you might say, I thought you were really assertive at the beginning of that presentation. I thought you started to waffle in the middle a little bit, but I thought you had a really strong end to the presentation. And what you're doing is sandwiching some of that negative feedback into some positives. Now, this tends to be quite a predictable method of giving feedback, and often I think because it's become so well known, people have started to recognise, oh, they're doing the feedback burger thing on me now. But I would say, regardless of that, you need to adhere to a principle of offering positives to start off with. And that in itself, from a brain level, means that that person is much more receptive. Or if you flip it around the other way, if you start with a negative, the first thing they're experiencing from feedback is a negative. And what can happen with that is that that person becomes less receptive, they're less open-minded, they become a little bit more defensive, and there's a chance, if they hear that enough, that they experience what's called learned helplessness. If you remember Sarah's email to me, Sarah was talking about, I felt less engaged because of my boss's feedback. Learned helplessness is pretty much, look, you know what, I'm just not going to bother. I'm not going to bother putting forward my best work, because if you're going to throw criticisms at me and it's not really going to help me, then I'm not going to value that experience. So Sarah started to use that feedback burger sandwich technique, and it started to gather some momentum working with her staff and being meticulous in, rather than just thinking that's the bit that I want to correct, actually let's reward and praise the thing that was really good first, and then start to tackle the thing that needed to improve, and then finish with a positive. And then the fourth area that I explored with Sarah is asking a simple question, is do your employees know what's expected of them? Whether that is psychological norms, how does it work in this team? Or equally, what are the objectives that they're working to? Do they know those? If you asked them as a team, but also individually, what are the objectives that you're working to? Would they know those? She said, yeah, absolutely. That's something that we're very clear on in induction and reinforcing with regular reviews and updates. Yeah, they know what's expected of them. They know those objectives. I said, okay, that's interesting then, because what you're then in a strong position to be able to do is say, this potentially needs some improvement, or this has gone really well, and that serves that objective. If we're going to accomplish that objective together, if you are going to achieve that objective, then I think you need to do this. And this is fundamental in terms of sort of motivational feedback, where you're in a position of being able to, as a leader, point to the steps that that person needs to take to accomplish a task or activity or a goal or an objective. And so what you're doing is speaking to their performance and saying, if you're going to achieve this, then you need to be doing that. And then pointing out that from a performance point of view. And so what this is all about is aligning to norms and objectives. And it gives you permission and some neutrality in being able to point to how that person can improve and up their performance. So that was probably part one of the conversation with Sarah, because 4 techniques is quite a lot to be getting on with. The burger technique is something that she was familiar with but didn't really particularly use. Aligning to norms wasn't really on her mind, and that gave her a nice technique that she could start to stretch, but also then taking a chance in a meeting. Right, feedback, what are we going to be doing with this? How do people want to work with it? That was enough for Sarah to be getting on with to start with. But her follow-up email was a few months later, which was, okay, this is going well now. We're starting to get some momentum with the feedback, but I'm concerned that they're going to take it personally. When I've had those conversations, my heart rate is going, and it's starting to concern me that a person's going to take it personally. So in this particular context, I think there is an importance to the manner in which you'd actually deliver the feedback, which I'll come on to in a moment. But probably philosophically, as a manager and as a leader, you should expect people to take some feedback personally. If you ask somebody to follow a new process, just do A, B, C, and D, they're probably going to go, yeah, okay, I can follow a process. So as soon as we start to give feedback about someone's personal performance, then it becomes much more emotional. If we're talking about someone's behaviour or their body language or their communication skills, that kind of speaks to who we are. And so it can feel much more upsetting, perhaps something that somebody is going to ruminate on for days and weeks on end. Well, I would urge you as a leader and as a manager is that you have got to view feedback as a gift. There are ways in which you can polish and deliver that feedback, which I'll come on to in a moment. But it's your responsibility to help that person's future self. And so at times, people will take it personally, and that's a signal that often people care. That doesn't mean that you can be sloppy and use poor techniques to deliver that feedback. You've just got to make sure you're doing your best in a compassionate way, being able to give that feedback in a way that actually resonates most with them so that they're most likely to move to action. And my top phrase here is that I back you, I support you, I believe in you. And once you're giving that feedback and you believe that person is going to be able to respond, they're going to feel supported in taking that first step forward. One specific technique is being really clear on what it is you're giving feedback about. A good example here is when I've given feedback to people over the phone. I first had to sort of put people out of their misery of not receiving a job offer. And I'd phone somebody up and I'd say, you know, I'm phoning about this job and that job. Thank you for coming to the interview. It was a lovely day. Well, wonderful for you to come along. Thank you for your interest. And I'm dithering to the point where I'm avoiding pulling the trigger. And I say, well, you know, okay, we've had lots of people. You did really well to get to the last few, and it wasn't you, it was me. I love you, but it just wasn't to be. And I'm getting to that point where actually I'm stumbling over my words in avoiding actually being clear. And so actually once I said to somebody, we won't be offering you the job. And they said, oh, that's amazing. And because I'd stumbled over the won't bit, they thought I said, we will be offering you the job. And so now if I'm in that position, then I'm much clearer to say, I'm sorry, but we will not be offering you the job. And so that I'm just being kind in making it clear and getting to the point. So Sarah goes away from that second session with a few more tools that she can start to build upon. One is a mindset of, yes, I'm probably going to find it a little bit uncomfortable in receiving feedback. And that's my responsibility as a manager and as a leader, to protect that person, to train that person, to hold the mirror up to that person. And then actually being much more precise and clear in her feedback so that she's in a position to not mumble and beat around the bush, but actually just get to the point that she thinks could be improved. And that got Sarah thinking a little bit further. And so a few months later, she got in contact again to say, our next session, I'd really like to work on that clarity. I'd really like to work on a way that we can depersonalize some of the feedback. What Sarah was concerned about, but also ambitious to upgrade her skills upon, was simply that she didn't want to replicate what her previous boss had done with her, and that sense of feedback being something that's a really negative experience, potentially humiliating. She wanted to try and remove as much as possible that sense in team members, but then also she wanted to make sure she was still empowering and still inspiring people to move to action. So what I then introduced to our conversations was a framework which I tiered into a bronze, silver and gold of feedback. Now, I would say that this is an advanced technique for people, and this is where people need to make sure you get the fundamentals right, like agreeing, helping people reflect, using that feedback burger, not taking it personally, all these sorts of principles upon which you can apply this final technique. So the bronze level of feedback is where you use the word you. You did this, you did that, and it's very candid, it's very direct, but it makes it personal. And so for Sarah's employees, her team members, as soon as they heard you, it sort of feels like a finger pointing at them. So using the word you, well, you are giving feedback, but you're making it personal. So be aware of that. The upgrade to that would be that it's not about you, it's about me. I saw this, I saw that. And so you're taking the onus of that particular person. The trouble with this, though, is that it potentially exerts dominance. It's the power play. I saw this and I'm the judging one. I'm the one who's assessing you. So it's less confrontational. It's sort of indirect, but it does mean that there's a bit of a power play going on there. And the final upgrade is using the, it, their, or those neutral terms to introduce and completely depersonalize, or as much as you can, depersonalizing the feedback. So introducing feedback from a neutral point of view, depersonalizing it. There was a moment, the behaviors, the feelings today. And so you're stripping back the you and the I. It's a difficult technique, but if you can start to try and introduce it as much as you can, it's a habit you're likely to be able to build. The most impressive thing that I thought that Sarah brought to this coaching conversation was an appetite and a will and a motivation to try and make things better for her employees. She wanted to learn and craft the skills so that other people could benefit, other people could improve their particular performance. And so don't just think this is something that we're all kind of hardwired and know how to do. It's a particular skill. And if you can go back through some of the steps that I'd shared with Sarah and integrate a couple of those into your day-to-day interactions, but do start with the agreement section, the agreement. How are we going to do this and get the conversation going? Best of luck with giving feedback to other people. I hope it goes well, but I hope it goes well for them too. If you found this particular video useful, you might find this one interesting too. And this one's all about asking for feedback. And there's also some tips there for leaders too. And this one, which is about debriefing, setting the scene for reviewing and reflecting. And that in itself cultures an environment for feedback. All the best.